Okay, let's be real for a second. Have you ever, looked at certain people in the world, the ones who maybe aren't exactly saints, and wondered how they ended up with all the money?
Yeah, it's a question that could really make you think.
Totally. So get this, we stumbled across this sermon that tackles this head on, and, well, it's pretty wild.
It's definitely a unique perspective.
It looks at wealth and power through this whole biblical lens, which honestly I wasn't sure what to expect.
Yeah, I was a little skeptical at first, too.
But we're not here to preach or anything. We just thought the logic was fascinating, and some of the connections the speaker makes are pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's more about exploring some different ideas, whether you agree with them or not.
Exactly. So, right off the bat, the speaker lays out this concept of two opposing kingdoms. One is Satan's kingdom, which is all about lack and scarcity.
And the other, of course, is God's kingdom, which is about abundance and overflowing blessings.
Right. And the speaker argues that when we focus on what we don't have, when we're constantly feeling like we're missing out, we're basically making ourselves vulnerable to, well, let's just say negative influences.
It's like we're lowering our defenses and leaving ourselves open to attack.
Exactly. And to illustrate this, they bring up the classic story of Adam and Eve. Remember, they had it all in the Garden of Eden.
Literally everything they could possibly need.
Right. But there's that one forbidden fruit, the one thing they couldn't have.
And of course, that's the one thing they fixated on.
It's like human nature, isn't it? We always want what we can't have. And the speaker points out that God specifically told them they could freely eat from every other tree in the garden.
See, he's emphasizing the abundance all around them.
Right, like, hey, look at all this amazing stuff you can have. Don't worry about that one little thing over there. But then, according to the speaker, Satan slithers in and subtly twists God's words, making Eve hyper-focused on the one thing she couldn't have. It's like a cosmic game of misdirection.
And the speaker suggests that we might be playing that same game in our own lives today.
Whoa, okay, that hits a little too close to home, doesn't it? Think about it. How often do we get caught up in what we don't have?
The bigger house, the fancier car, the perfect Instagram life.
And while we're busy obsessing over those things, we miss the abundance that's already present in our lives.
The love, the friendships, the simple joys.
It's like we're trading real, genuine happiness for this illusion of what we think we should have.
And the speaker wants us to really examine that. They're asking, are we so focused on what's missing that we're missing out on what matters most?
That's a powerful question. And it leads to another really interesting point the speaker makes about the power of words. They argue that words are more than just sounds we make. They actually shape how we see the world, how we interpret reality.
It's like they have this hidden power to influence our thoughts, our beliefs, our actions.
And they use this really cool example of the word mitochondria. If we don't know what it means, it's just a jumble of letters, right? But once we understand its meaning, its function within our cells, it unlocks this whole new level of understanding about our biology.
It's like a key that opens a door to a whole new world.
Exactly. And the speaker then suggests that this applies to all sorts of words and concepts. The way we use language can have a profound impact on how we perceive things.
Think about marketing slogans and how they influence our buying decisions. Or political rhetoric and how it can sway public opinion.
Whoa, yeah, that's getting into some deep territory. But it's true, isn't it? Words have this incredible power to shape our reality. And the speaker goes even further, suggesting that maybe, just maybe, that's how Satan tricked Eve in the garden. He intentionally twisted God's words, manipulating her perception of what was true and what wasn't.
That's like he used language as a weapon to deceive her, to lead her astray.
Okay, that's pretty mind-blowing. But here's where things get really interesting. The speaker then drops this bombshell. They argue that humans were originally given dominion over the earth, this incredible power to shape and build, like ultimate kingdom-building power. But when Adam and Eve disobeyed God, they essentially handed over that authority to Satan.
It's like they lost their inheritance, their birthright, to rule and create.
Hold on, handed over authority. What does that even mean in a practical sense? Like, did they sign a cosmic contract or something?
Well, the speaker seems to be saying that God's original plan was for us to be stewards of creation, to rule over the earth with wisdom and compassion.
So we were meant to be like the ultimate caretakers, the benevolent rulers of this planet.
Yeah, something like that. But by falling for Satan's tricks, we messed up that plan. We lost that right to rule, and according to the speaker, our connection to true abundance.
Okay, that's a lot to process. But if that's the case, why do so many people who are trying to do good in the world seem to struggle? while some people who are, well, let's just say less than ethical end up thriving. Doesn't seem fair, does it?
That's the big question, isn't it? And it's the question that the speaker dives into next, using a pretty surprising story from the Bible. Remember Cain and Abel?
Oh, yeah, Cain and Abel, those guys had a bit of a sibling rivalry, to put it mildly.
Yeah, a bit is an understatement. Cain, of course, ended up murdering his brother. And the speaker points out something really interesting. After that, Cain went on to build a city.
Wait, so the guy who committed murder is the one building a city. What's the significance of that?
Well, in the biblical context, building a city is symbolic of establishing a kingdom, a seat of power. It's about creating a legacy, building something that will last.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. So Cain, even though he did this horrible thing, is the one who's focused on building a kingdom, on leaving his mark on the world.
Right. And the speaker even goes into detail about Cain's descendants, listing them out. Ranchers, metalworkers, musicians, they're all involved in activities that represent building wealth and establishing dominance in the material world.
So they're basically building empires, but are those empires built on solid ground? I mean, if it all started with murder, what does that say about their legacy?
That's exactly the kind of question the speaker wants us to ask. They seem to be suggesting that Cain's lineage inherited this drive for worldly success, this ambition from Satan himself, as a direct consequence of Adam and Eve's disobedience.
Wow, okay, that's a pretty heavy concept. So we've got this idea that evil people might be thriving because they've tapped into this kingdom-building energy, often focused on material wealth and power.
But what about those of us who are trying to do good in the world? Why do we sometimes feel like we're struggling uphill while others are coasting? That's what we're going to unpack next as we dive deeper into this sermon.
Okay, so we're kind of grappling with this idea, right? Like maybe evil people are doing so well because they've tapped into this whole kingdom building thing, this focus on getting ahead in the world.
Right, this drive for material success and power. But then the question becomes, well, what about everyone else? What about those of us who are trying to live good lives, to make a positive difference? Why do we sometimes feel like we're hitting a wall while others seem to be breezing through?
It's a tough one, right? It can make you wonder if maybe, just maybe, we've been conditioned to think that struggling, having less actually brings us closer to God. It's like we've bought into this idea that wealth and spirituality are somehow
You're
opposites.
exactly right. And the speaker dives into that even further, talking about some of the subtle ways Satan might be influencing us. They call them covert lies. These sneaky little deceptions disguised as harmless ideas that slowly seep into our thinking.
Okay, covert lies. That sounds intense. What are we talking about here? Give us some examples.
Well, one they give is how we talk about addiction. The speaker suggests that by calling it alcoholism, we're framing it as a disease rather than a sin, maybe even lessening the sense of personal responsibility. It's subtle, but it changes how we view the behavior.
I never thought about it that way before, but it makes sense. Like, we're taking away some of the agency, right? The choice involved in the addiction.
Exactly. And they talk about how this kind of language shift can happen in all sorts of areas.
Mm.
They even bring up how we describe same-sex relationships. The word gay, which is now pretty much universally accepted, replaced a term that was, well, incredibly offensive. The speaker suggests that this change, while good in many ways, might have also been a deliberate attempt to shift public perception, to change how people view those relationships.
Whoa. Okay, so we're getting into the power of words to shape our thinking, even on a subconscious level. But if these covert lies are so subtle, how do we even spot them? How do we protect ourselves?
That's where those keys to the kingdom come in. Remember the passage where Jesus gives Peter the keys to the kingdom of heaven?
Yeah, I've always found that passage pretty mysterious. What's the speaker's take on it?
They believe those keys aren't literal keys, like you'd use to open a door. Instead, they represent the truth of God's word. And this is where things get really interesting. They suggest that those keys can unlock the gates of hell. But get this, those gates aren't in hell itself. They're in our minds.
Okay, wait, hold on. Gates of hell in our minds. I'm not sure I'm following.
Think about it. What are the things that keep us trapped, that keep us feeling stuck in cycles of fear, lack, and scarcity? It's those negative thought patterns, those limiting beliefs that whisper, you're not good enough, you'll never have enough, you don't deserve abundance. The speaker is saying those voices, those thoughts, those are the gates of hell.
Wow. So they're suggesting that by aligning ourselves with the truth of God's word, we can break free from those mental prisons.
Exactly. But here's the thing. It's not just about passively accepting those truths. It's about actively applying them to our lives, challenging those negative thought patterns, making choices that reflect our highest potential.
It's like instead of letting those negative thoughts run the show, we need to take control and make them work for us.
Exactly. And the speaker says a good place to start is by looking at our own beliefs about wealth and success. What are those lies we might be telling ourselves that are blocking us from experiencing God's blessings? Are we afraid of success? Do we feel guilty about having more than others?
Okay, those are some tough questions. And the speaker doesn't stop there. They go back to the Old Testament and use this fascinating story about Cain and Abel to illustrate their point about kingdom building. It's really pretty wild.
It definitely makes you think. The speaker points out that after, the whole incident with his brother, Cain ends up building a city. And in the Bible, building a city is all about establishing a kingdom, creating a seat of power, leaving a legacy.
And the speaker ties this back to Cain's inheritance from Satan, right? Like it's this ripple effect from Adam and Eve's disobedience. But what about Abel? What happened to his descendants?
According to the speaker, Abel's lineage focused more on worship, on spiritual matters. They weren't as concerned with building earthly empires or amassing fortunes. So we have these two contrasting lineages, one focused on worldly power and the other on spiritual pursuits. And the speaker seems to be saying that these two lineages represent the two opposing kingdoms we've been talking about.
Right. The kingdom of lack versus the kingdom of abundance. But what does that mean for us today? We're not all descended from Cain or Abel, right? So how does this ancient story apply to our modern lives?
Well, I think the speaker's using this biblical story as a metaphor to illustrate a bigger point. We all inherit certain tendencies, certain ways of thinking and behaving that can influence our choices. And those choices ultimately shape our destinies.
So it's not just about nature versus nurture, right? It's about recognizing that there might be deeper forces at play, forces we might not even be aware of that can influence our path.
Exactly. And the speaker seems to be saying that understanding these forces can empower us to make more conscious choices about the kind of kingdom we want to create in our own lives.
It's about taking ownership, right? Not blaming our ancestors or feeling trapped by our past. It's about recognizing those patterns and then making a conscious choice to break free from them if they're not serving us.
Yes, it's about choosing to align ourselves with abundance, with our highest potential. It's about remembering that we have the power to choose in every moment, whether we want to live in a kingdom of lack or a kingdom of abundance. And the speaker believes the keys to unlocking that kingdom of abundance lie in the truth of God's word.
Okay, so we've been talking about these two opposing kingdoms, the kingdom of lack and the kingdom of abundance, and like how we have this power to choose which one we align ourselves with. But the speaker throws in this really intriguing twist, suggesting that our choices might actually be influenced by something we inherit. It's kind of a mind-blowing concept, right?
It definitely makes you think about things in a whole new way. The speaker goes back to the Old Testament and points to the lineage of Cain and Abel as like proof for this idea. Remember, Cain ends up building a city after,
Yeah, after the whole incident with his brother.
Exactly. And the speaker interprets that act of building a city as establishing a kingdom that's deeply rooted in worldly power and ambition. It's like a physical manifestation of those desires.
And they suggest that this drive for worldly success was somehow passed down through generations, all the way from Satan to Cain, as a consequence of Adam and Eve's choice to disobey God.
It's a pretty wild idea, right? Like, we inherit this predisposition towards ambition, but it comes with maybe a darker side. And the speaker contrasts this with Abel's lineage, which they describe as being more focused on spiritual matters, less concerned with earthly power or possessions.
So we have these two contrasting lineages, almost like two branches on a family tree, each representing a different approach to life. But how does that apply to us today? Like, we're not all directly descended from Cain or Abel, right? So how does this ancient story connect to our modern lives?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think the speaker is using this biblical story as a metaphor to make a bigger point. We all inherit certain tendencies, certain ways of thinking and behaving that can influence our choices, big and small. And those choices, over time, shape who we become and what we create in the world.
So it's not just nature versus nurture. It's about recognizing that there might be these deeper forces at play, these underlying patterns we've inherited that we might not even be aware of.
Exactly. And the speaker seems to be suggesting that understanding these deeper forces can actually give us more power, more freedom to make conscious choices about what we want to build in our lives. It's like shining a light on those hidden influences so we can decide whether to embrace them or break free from them.
So it's not about blaming our ancestors or feeling trapped by our past. It's about taking ownership of those inherited patterns and making a conscious choice to, like, rewrite the script.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we have the power to choose which kingdom we want to align ourselves with, the kingdom of lack or the kingdom of abundance. And the speaker believes that the keys to unlocking the kingdom of abundance lie in aligning ourselves with the truth of God's word.
It's about remembering that we are inherently worthy of abundance, that it's our birthright, and that when we align ourselves with that truth, everything else starts to fall into place.
Absolutely. It's about letting go of those limiting beliefs that keep us trapped in scarcity and stepping into the fullness of what God has planned for us.
So to our listeners, as you continue to reflect on this sermon's message, we encourage you to ask yourselves, what kind of kingdom are you building? What legacy are you leaving behind? And are you living in alignment with the abundance that is rightfully yours?
The conversation doesn't end here. Keep exploring these ideas, keep asking questions, and keep searching for truth.
That's it for this deep dive. We hope it sparked some new insights and inspired you to think about things in a new way. Until next time, happy diving.